and welcome back to Mariana Mass Books. My name is Mariana and today I am here with my Read Historical Fiction 2024, I think it was the name, wrap-up. So originally today I was going to film my mid-year freakout Historathon edition because it's beyond time to do it. But I recently had a cold and I am not I don't want to talk about a lot of books, and also I don't want to edit a lot, and that is harder to edit. And in this one I'm going to talk about fewer books and I think it's going to be an easier edit. I'm aiming for not editing too much. So here I am with this video instead, but after this I will film my mid-year freakout Historathon edition because I want to get it on my channel in July. Read Historical Fiction 2024 was a readathon created by Shelley at Shelley Swearingen, which is about reading historical fiction as the name suggests. If you've watched my channel, you know that I did a video for Mexican historical fiction, which was sort of like a pile of possibilities type video for this readathon. I was thinking about reading historical fiction anyway, and then Shelley announced her event, and so I decided to go ahead and participate. As is the case with me always, I didn't read the books that I said I was going to read, but I did read from that list. Some really amazing reads, 2 favorites for the year, so it was a great experience. I want to continue reading historical fiction, and I learned a couple of things about me as a historical fiction reader, because if you watch my video that I did for my pile of possibilities, I mentioned that I struggle with historical fiction even though it's a genre that I should love. I love historical fiction on TV and in movies. I love period TV, period movies, and I love reading history, and I love historical fantasy, and I love historical fantasy that is super well researched. And so historical fiction is something that I should love. But the reason why I struggle with historical fiction is precisely because I like reading history non-fiction. And so when I pick up a historical fiction book, I'm usually wondering, is this true? Isn't this true? Was this invented by the author? Is this part of the story, or is this part of the author's research? Is this fact? Is this not fact? And so my brain is constantly thinking about those things, and that doesn't let me enjoy the book. I'm sorry about the lighting. It's really cloudy today. Okay, I hate turning on that light, but it got really cloudy suddenly. I hate the shadows. You're going to have to bear with me with the lighting for this one. So I was saying, yeah, that's why I struggle with historical fiction, and I was in that video I mentioned that I was going to try to just read the book, enjoy the story without having that voice constantly in my mind. And I discovered something while reading that is in terms of my personal relationship as a reader with historical fiction. So I'm not saying that this is what should be, it's just what I experience while reading historical fiction. And it is that I shouldn't read historical fiction to learn history. I'm going to be a snob for a couple of seconds. Bear with me. I don't think anyone should read historical fiction to learn about history. I think you should read if you want to learn about history but you don't like history nonfiction, then approach historical fiction as like an introduction to a time period, but pending further research. And that's all I'm going to say because I don't want to be too much of a snob. But so personally, I don't think I should go into historical fiction to learn about a time period, to learn like the facts or the things that happened. But what I do think, and what I realized with the books that I read, is that I should read historical fiction not to learn the facts about a time period, but to experience the time period, if that makes sense. So I'm going to give an example. So I was reading one of the books that I'm going to talk about, and they are talking about a really well-known historical figure. And so the author is describing this person walking through the palace and the feeling of the stone beneath their feet. It wasn't the palace, he was walking somewhere else, but the author was describing the feeling of the hot stone beneath their feet. And that is very accurate because according to research, right, that particular place where he was at would have been made of stone, the floor, and so therefore that is like a very particular sensory detail that I really enjoyed because it really put me there in the setting, and it really brought the past to life because it's this human being walking, feeling the hot stone beneath their feet. And there's another example where someone is lying down and they're looking up, and it's the sky is described in a certain way based on the architecture of the palace where the person is lying down, and so it makes a shape in the sky, and so they are lying down and it describes like the shape of the blue above them. And again, that just put me there, put me in the moment, and made me get into the body of this historical person. And it's just one of those things where it's a very small sensory detail that, no history book is going to tell you, oh, this historical figure was lying down one day looking up at the sky, and, for all intents and purposes, we can't know that this person actually one day lied down and looked at the sky. But it's very likely that a person at some point in their lives would look up at the sky. And based on the archaeology, based on the research, based on everything we know, that is what it would have looked like, because we know what the building looked like, and the sky is blue and it's above. And so those sensory details really put me into the time, into the place. And the books that I really loved, they describe a lot the sound, the smells, the feelings, the tastes, and that just really puts me there. And as I said, it brings the past to life, and it brings these historical figures to life, and put me there. It puts me there, and I love that, because one of the things that I most hate while reading history is that I can't time travel to all those time periods and see everything. And so reading historical fiction, well researched historical fiction, put me in a place where it is kind of like time travel. Now, this teaches me something about the type of historical fiction that I should look for, and that is historical fiction that is maybe, yes, more literary in nature, and also well researched. Not just like the vibes, but really an author that you can tell has read documents, has read history books, chronicles of the time. You can like when I read historical fantasy, you can feel the research on page, and that is something that I enjoy because I do feel like the author is taking me there. So that is something that I learned. But then also, and I don't want to discount, because I also read a lot for vibes. like that's just, I can't help it. I read a lot for vibes. A lot of the fantasy that I read, a lot of the history, even, like, I love the vibes. And that is something that is less objective, less explainable, because for me it's about the vibes. And I am not discounting that type of historical fiction, because sometimes you do just want to read a book that has a particular vibe, like a maybe moody, dark, gothic, maybe Victorian, like that type of vibe. So I am not discounting that type of historical fiction, and that I also enjoy. But what I realize is that for that type of historical fiction, and I think I already knew that, but since I'm doing this reflection, go with me. For those types of books, for that type of historical fiction, I I prefer books that are not about famous historical events, but rather stories set in a particular time period. So like that, I've always known that I enjoy. I guess what I struggled with was when you have more recognizable figures, because then I'm starting to wonder. But I do enjoy the books that are just set in a particular time period, but that are not about famous historical events. So that would be enough for the introduction. I'm just going to move ahead with the books, and I'm going to talk about three and a half books. So I read three and a half books, which I think is pretty successful. And the reason why I managed to read three and a half books is because I didn't read the long, chunky books that I said I wanted to read and that I said I was most interested in. I read short books. So the first book that I want to talk about is You Dreamed of Empires by Álvaro Enrigue. I'm not going to talk about the book a lot because I reviewed it during my mid-year freakout, so I'm going to link it down below if you want to check out my full review. I read this book by the recommendation of a fellow booktuber, Eva from Eva Strange. She recommended that book when she saw that I was reading a lot of conquest history, and I am glad that she did. And I have actually seen the book around in several mid-year freakout tags, which makes me happy because it's a fantastic book. This is my favorite book that I've read so far in the year, and maybe I will read something better, but like as of now, I think this is going to be my favorite book of the year, and it's now I consider it. If someone were to ask me what's your favorite book, I would probably answer with this one because it just not only because it's great, but also on a personal level and the things that interest me. I just yeah, anyway, what is this book about? So this book is a historical fiction book set during the time of the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs. So historically, there is a moment where Hernan Cortes, who was the captain of the Spanish Castilians, he comes to the territory that is now Mexico, and he reaches Tenochtitlan, which was the capital of the Aztecs. And in Tenochtitlan, the current ruler at the time was Moctezuma. And so there is a moment that we know that is recorded in history where Moctezuma and Cortes meet. Then there is a period of time after that, a couple of months, I think, where Cortes and Moctezuma are co-ruling from Tenochtitlan. I will go deeper into that when I do my conquest video part 2, but they are there for a time, and those months we don't know what happened. We have the records and the chronicles for the meeting, and then we have a lot of chronicles and stuff for what happened after, but they differ. They are very implausible. We don't know exactly what went on after Cortes and Moctezuma meet. And so this novel is about the day after that Cortes and Moctezuma meet, which I think is honestly a genius idea. I was so excited when I discovered this book because, or when Eva recommended it to me, because after I read, history about the conquest, and I learned about this meeting, and I learned about this time period where the two of them were in Tenochtitlan together. I was honestly, and this is something that I did tell my family, my friends. I was like, why hasn't anyone written a book about this time period, or make a movie, or a series or something? Because it's perfect material for historical fiction. And lo and behold, Álvaro Enrique this is what he's doing. And so just from that fact alone, I was going to love it because of the time period and the premise. But the book is fantastic. So that's what the book is about, kind of like the time period after Cortes and Moctezuma meet. And within the imagination of the author, how that could have gone, but with a bit of alternate history, because the ending is not very historical. But everything else, the setting, the people, except for one Spanish captain, all of the people are historical. The setting is very historical. The way the government works, even the meeting with Cortes and Moctezuma, there is a very embarrassing incident uh, where Cortes tries to hug Moctezuma, and he gets almost killed. And all those things are historical, and I talk more about that in my review, in my media freakout. But it is a very humorous book, because what the author does is that he takes the clash of cultures and the confusion of the Spanish, and he uses that to create very humorous scenarios. So it's a very hilarious book. He pokes a lot of fun at the Spanish and also at Moctezuma, and there is a lot of use of hallucinogen hallu- mushrooms, mushrooms that cause hallucinations. So it is a bit weird by the end, like a bit of a fever dream of a book. And it's just honestly amazing. If you are up for some weird historical fiction that is very funny, and that is also weirdly very historical, even though it's a time period that we don't know, and even though it's alternate history, if you're up for some of that, do check this book out. And if you want to comment it, please comment in the video, and we can Voxer, because I need to talk about this book with someone. So that is the first book that I read, and it's my, as I said, favorite book of the year. And I think that book I did for the prompts of speculative elements, because it is alternate history. Then I'm going to talk about Cartucho by Nellie Campobello. This is a book that in the introduction I learned that there is an English translation that I guess maybe you could find in like a thrift store or something. But according to the introduction, it's not a very good translation. So I don't know. I can see why, because this book has a lot of slang, a lot of very particular use of the Spanish language, specifically in the north of the country at the time of the Revolution, which is when this book is set. This book is a collection of vignettes. So it's a short story, but it's more like vignettes about the revolution, which was a war in Mexico that was not for independence. This was a revolution against a dictator in 1910. It started. So that is the time period. Nellie Campobello was alive during the time of the revolution. So this is kind of like autofiction. Um, in vignette style, and it is from the perspective of a little girl. She was a girl during the time of the revolution. There is a bit of a question mark about the date of birth of the author. She had a very mysterious life, so her life could also be novelized because honestly, she was an author, a choreographer, a dancer, so she had a very interesting life. Now, this book is fantastic and it's another one of my favorites of the year. It is amazing but also super difficult to read because it is from a child perspective and because of the writing style, which is very sparse, very simple, very matter of fact. um it hits really hard when you are from the perspective of a girl, a young girl, and she is describing maybe a man that she befriends because he's a soldier in the revolution, and he plays with the children and he gives them candy, and then at the end of the story he gets shot and his dead body is lying there and she can see it. Those types of things happen in this book, and they are very rough. There are some stories that really gives me goosebumps thinking about them now. I love books that are from a perspective of a kid that are adult. I have read a few novels like that, and I really enjoy them when they are done well, and I think this is done really well. Um, I also think that the vignette style works perfectly for this because it does give you like glimpses into what it must have been to experience that time period of a revolutionary war. The vignette, yeah, the structure and the style works really well. The first part, it's divided into three parts. The first part is called Northmen, and it's just every vignette is about a different man, a different soldier, and so she just gives like profiles for them. And then the second part is called mm, I don't know how to translate, but men who were killed during the revolution, whether it be in the firing squad or in battle, or just they were in the streets and they get shot, like men who were killed. And a lot of them are the men who were described in the first section. So in the first section you get to know them just like a glimpse, a profile, but because it is from the perspective of the girl, it's very small details, the way a kid thinks, where the description will be like, oh, he always had his white boots. That's what the kid remembers. And then in the second section, maybe those white boots are filled with blood. Like that's the type of evolution that goes through the vignettes in the structure. And then the final part of the book is longer short stories. They are still short, but longer than a couple of paragraphs, not really vignettes, about different moments in the revolution that do, a lot of them do feel a lot of like autofiction. There are a lot about her mom, and I do think those are autofiction. So I was very curious at the end about which stories were made up and which were just from her memory. And yeah, so really loved it. Also one of my favorites. And I really hope that an indie press picks this up and has a good translation for it, because there is a lot of very specific language that would be hard maybe to translate, or that would be easy to mistranslate. So like for instance the use of the word mother, where men will call women mother and that doesn't mean that they are actually their mother. That type of thing is just like a way of speech. specifically in the north of Mexico. So I do hope that someone would pick this book up because it is honestly amazing. And I hope that someone writes a book about Nellie Campobello because her life was just an enigma, a mystery, so interesting. As I said, she grew up in the north of Mexico during the revolution, but then because of political reasons, when she went to Mexico City, she changed her name, and then she changed it again. She became a dancer because her sister loved dancing, so she was a ballet dancer, she was a choreographer, she was, I think, the founder of the Mexico City Ballet. I'm going to correct myself on screen, but like she had a very interesting life, and then by the end of her life there is like she has a last appearance when she's old, and then years later it is discovered that she has died and she has been dead for years, and it seems that she spent the last years of her life, kidnapped by a couple. It's just like someone needs to get on that novelization of her life, honestly. And that one would fit the prompt for a book from the perspective of an ordinary person. The first one could also fit from an extraordinary person because it does talk about Cortés and Moctezuma. Oh, I forgot to mention that I read this book because I was inspired by Karla Likes to Read. Karla is a new booktuber who commented on my Mexican historical fiction video. Go check out her videos, they are amazing, and she has great reading taste. Honestly, I love all the books she talks about, and she commented on that book, on that video, telling me that she was going to read Cartucho. It wasn't a body read or anything, but like I just wanted to. She inspired me to pick it up as well, and just like yeah. So moving on, the next book that I'm going to talk about is Ixbalam-Ek, Estrella, Jaguar by Ruperta Bautista, who is a Maya indigenous woman from Mexico, and she is mostly a poet. This is her first novel, which is very poetic, and I love this edition because this is a bilingual edition. So the first section of the book is the novel in the Maya Tzotzil language, and then the second part is the novel in Spanish. Um, this one is set in the 6th century in a Maya town. So this one is researched, and there is like an author note at the end where she talks about her research and the decisions that she made. But pre-Hispanic era, pre-Columbine, I think it's called in English. 6th century Maya. We don't necessarily know a lot of super specific details. We do know some things, and this is what I think is very clever about this. This uses a lot of sensory language, so it describes a lot of the sounds, the plants, the wind, that type of thing, based on what we know archaeologically of the types of species that were around, the type of food that was eaten. So, like, it focuses on those types of details to bring the time alive. I want to make a parenthesis because at the beginning of the video, when I was talking about the books that were very sensory, this was one of them, and the other one is the You Dreamed of Empire. So when I was talking about like the historical figures feeling the warm stone on their feet and seeing the sky, that was from You Dreamed of Empires. But this one also has a lot of descriptions about the sounds of the birds and the smells of the incense, and like the ritual incense that was used, and a lot of things you can hear, you can smell, you can feel. And that is a very clever way to put you in that time period where we don't know as many details about like the functioning of the government as we do for the Aztecs, but we do know these types of environmental aspects and cultural aspects that would give you small details to put you in that time period. So I think that was a very clever way to do it from the author. And this book follows the dying queen, Ixbalam-Ek, which is the title of the novel, Estrella, Jaguar, which means star Jaguar, which is the name of the queen. So she is dying, and as she lays dying, she is remembering her life. So you drift in and out of her in bed because she's in her sick bed, in her deathbed, reminiscing about her past. And so you jump from the present to the past, and it is written in a way where you literally feel that feeling of like being asleep and waking up and being asleep and waking up, because that's how it feels when she's like in her memories and then in the present and then in her memories and then in the present. And so you witness her life up until the end, but it starts in the end. It starts in her deathbed, and you like that is the current present timeline. This book doesn't have a translation in English, but there are poetry books by the author that are translated to English. She is a well-known poet, Ruperta Bautista, so if you're interested in her writing, you can check out the translations that are of her poetry. I haven't read her poetry, but I really want to. I really enjoyed this book. I think it was really well done and very poetic, and I am curious to read about her poetry. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the book that I haven't finished because, as I said, I read 3.5 books. Wait, the last book, the prompt that would fit is a new to you time period. That would be the prompt. Back to this one. This is Sudden Death by Álvaro Enrigue, who is the author of You Dreamed of Empires. And while this is a book by a Mexican author, this isn't set in Mexico. So this would feel the prompt of outside of your country or a country you're not from. And this is also weird historical fiction. And this is less historical than You Dreamed of Empires. This is more experimental and bizarre, but with historical figures. This book is about a tennis match in 1599 between the Italian painter Caravaggio and the Spanish poet Quevedo, Francisco de Quevedo. That's what it's about. But the structure of the book is every chapter is about a different thing. So you have chapters where you are following the tennis match, but then in between the tennis match you get random chapters that talk about different things. So like the history of tennis, or there is a chapter that talks about tennis balls that were made from the hair of the beheaded head of Anne Boleyn. So like, and there is a chapter where he talks about like the historical beheading of Anne Boleyn, but then he talks about how after her head was off, from her hair there were tennis balls made, and they were these super expensive luxury items that were very what's the word, like everyone wanted them. And then you have other chapters about Cortez and the Spanish conquest. So like you have in between chapters, but that kind of like gets it does get tied together, even though it's like completely random. And also, like in between chapters, you get emails from his editor and him. Each I love those types of books. I love those types of like experimental books where you have a lot of different things that are seemingly random but also work together. Um, and it's also very funny. So, he also has other books that are not historical fiction, and I'm curious to check them out because, as I said, I don't love contemporary fiction, but I love his writing style and I love his sense of humor, and he writes such weird stories. So I'm curious if in his contemporary fiction it also has this humorous weird nature to it. As I said when I reviewed You Dreamed of Vampires in my mid-year freakout, I'm not one for weird fiction usually. I don't love it, but this is weird enough that I think is genius, but not so weird that it throws me off. So if you don't like weird fiction, but you do like kooky stuff, this could be for you. If you know the idea of a tennis match between Caravaggio and Quevedo, where there are tennis balls made from Anne Boleyn's hair, if that sounds like something you would laugh about and you would enjoy reading, go ahead and pick it up. I haven't finished it, but honestly, like, it's amazing. It's, yeah. So those are all the books I wanted to talk about. Thank you so much for watching. This was super fun. I'm definitely going to continue with my Mexican historical fiction list and with historical fiction in general. And I don't know, I'm in a weird place with my reading where I'm reading stuff that I'm like, I'm interested in some things that maybe I wouldn't have been before, but I'm having so much fun, honestly. Like, I'm loving my reading this year. I hope you're also having a good reading year, and I'm going to leave it at that. I will see you soonish, hopefully, with my mid-year freakout historathon edition. And in the meantime, I wish you happy reading.